A side, B side, what side are you on?
What's going on, Adam? Welcome back to A-Side, B-Side podcast.
I am doing very well. How are you, Brooke?
I'm good. So how was your week?
It's been good. I had 2 volleyball games that I got to announce. That was really fun. Somehow that season is already almost over. The last game is this week. So that feels like time is absolutely flying. We were just talking about how fast time is going, but somehow we're in October already and it hasn't snowed yet in Minnesota. So I'm going to call that a win.
Oh my gosh, they're talking about that it's going to drop here by next week and be like in the 30s in the morning. And I'm like, no, come on.
We had a frost alert last week and I was just like, no, this we don't do this. Not till, like, at least give me till October to have some frost. But it's not a big deal. It's not like I got to pull plants in because every plant I have is either dead or dying. So it's not like I'm like, oh, I gotta cover the plants to keep them alive. No, they're just not very planty. Yeah, so I've been plugging along. I had volleyball. I've been watching a lot of TV. I started, and this was against counsel. Like, I've had friends who have watched this and they're like, Adam, this is not a show for you. You're not gonna like it. It's gonna creep you out. You already don't sleep, so do not watch this new show. And I'm like, okay, I don't think I'm gonna watch it.
Dahmer?
And I started watching Dahmer.
Why would you do that? If you would have asked me, I would have told you the same thing.
I know. Just shocking, like, breaking news. Sometimes Adam doesn't make good decisions. So I got about 15 minutes in, and then I literally turned it off and started watching cartoons. I was like, I can't do this. I'm like, give me some Phineas and Ferb. That is insanely intense. And everything that I've read and people who've actually been able to make it through, I've had friends that had to, like, pace themselves.
Oh yeah, I could not watch more than, I mean, and you know me, I am a binger. Like, I will spend the entire night watching, and I couldn't do more than like 2 back to back, and then I had to watch like Love Island or something because it was just like, ooh. And it's
just something, a palate cleanser,
right? And like, and actually we're going to get into this a bit on the B-side today, but, and it's not that it was more graphic, because I mean, it is graphic, don't get me wrong, it is graphic. It's not that it's more graphic than any of the other shows out there, because Squid Game, very graphic.
There's a lot of graphic stuff out there.
It's Evan Peters.
Yeah.
Is so intense.
Ralph Boner. I mean, can you imagine the range to go from playing a character named Ralph Boner,
right,
on WandaVision to Jeffrey Dahmer?
But like, he is so good at this role and so intense. Like, I saw an interview with him afterwards, and he's got like this full beard and he's grown his hair out, and it's like, I feel like he like went as far away from that look as possible, because he is scarily good in this role. And
I mean, I'm sure he didn't want to be like out at getting coffee and have like everyone just staring at him.
Right, like, oh my
like, oh my God, it's Jeffrey Dahmer. Shockingly, he got his meat raw.
I mean, there are good, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of good actors, and like, oh yeah, they played that he got into this role. And and I feel like that's what is the creepiest part about it. That's what makes it so intense and so disturbing.
And they do it in the storytelling. And again, I only watched 15 minutes of it, so I'm not exactly an expert, but I've read a lot about, talked to other people who've seen the whole series, and they said that the way the stories are told is a different experience as well. It's not the same. It's not presented in the way that you're used to. So I think that also adds a different, that was feel to it.
Intentional. Like, Ryan Murphy did not want this to be a Jeffrey Dahmer retelling, romanticizing, because he is horrific and he was terrible, but he wanted to show how horrific he was. So it's as if you are actually watching Jeffrey Dahmer do all of these things, and you're watching the victims and their lives. You know, there's a couple of victims. They don't go into every victim's life, which again, that's going to be part of what we do today. They don't go into every victim's life, but
wait, are you doing the Dahmer story today?
I'm not doing the Dahmer story, but
Oh, okay. I was like, wow, did I really ruin this?
No, but I do want to discuss his victims, because that is something we fail to do a lot in true crime podcasts. Not just this one and the ones I listen to, we talk about the person that did the crimes, but we forget about the victims. And since this show is what everybody's talking about right now, I wanted to, on the B side, let's talk about his victims, because they were people and they lived and they had families that love them to this day, that their spirit is still with them. And there were some beautiful people that are gone because of this. So that's what we're going to be doing later. But I recommended it to my mom, of course, but I'm saying to most people, if you're asking me if I'm recommending it to you, I'm not going to say I am. I'm going to tell you that I watched it and that it is intense.
Yeah. And there's no shame in turning it off and putting on some cartoons.
At all.
At all. I mean, if there is shame, I'm going to wear that shame just fine because I'm going to sleep easy. Well, man, Phineas and Ferb got up to some stuff today, didn't they? All right, now I'm going to sleep.
I'm trying to think if I've watched anything else. The Patient, still watching that. That has a couple more episodes to go. And see, to me, that is, I feel like that has had some really graphic scenes, but the difference is it's fictional as opposed to we know what he did in real life.
And it's definitely like that was something I'm going to mention in the A side today too, about the graphic nature of how things have changed over the last 20, 30 years. And I've watched, tons of murder mystery shows, but if, it's so jarring to bounce from like a 1986 episode of Murder, She Wrote to 2016, NCIS, and even just, those network shows, what they show and what the level of, gore and violence is just incredibly skyrocketed. And I think it feels like, that old, I don't even know if it's a urban legend or if it's actual science fact, but the whole, like if you put a frog in boiling water, they'll jump out. But if you put a frog in regular water and then heat it up to boiling, they don't notice it and they die. Yeah. It just feels like when you see it so starkly from different eras, you're like, oh wow, yeah, this wasn't a thing that we did before, and now we are showing way more. I was like, I never had like scary dreams about Jessica Fletcher. I mean, that would have been an entirely new version of therapy, but I did, because it was just like, oh, this guy, like, it looked like death was people just kind of like falling over. It wasn't like there was a ton of blood,
right. They had the horrible and then they fell.
Yeah, it was like, or they just, they found him and they were already dead. It's like there was no blood or anything. And it's like, oh, okay. But yeah, it's a big difference, and definitely changes your perception.
I don't know that I've watched it. Like I said, I've been just kind of focusing on that, and then just kind of getting back into my regular shows like The Rookie, and then there's the spinoff, The Rookie Feds, which has Niecy Nash, who is also in Dahmer.
Right. Again, showed a lot of range.
Yeah, you're like, wow, because there was one night where I did watch Dahmer and then I went to Rookie Feds and I was like, wow, this is a huge contrast right here.
A little bit different.
Yeah. So that one really took up my time this week, just trying to.
Have you been watching She-Hulk at all?
No, I haven't gotten into it. I've just been kind of
No, I mean, it's funny because it seems like the more and more that I do research and I find stuff on YouTube or articles, there's so much clickbait out there about how like something is horrible. And again, we'll talk about this in the A side, but there's been a lot of like pushback that the Marvel universe is dying, or it's, you know, it's not as good as it used to be, and the, you know, like that, all that sort of stuff. But it's really grown on me. Every one of the series has grown on me as the more that they've done, and they're all so unique in style, and this one is so different. It's like an Ally McBeal kind of, you know, sitcom dramedy, you know, type of thing, and the people in it are so good that it works. Like the latest episode was just sort of your trite sitcom. Oh, you know, this person ends up going to a retreat. They don't want to be there, but then they really learn something about themselves throughout the process. And you're like, you know where it's going, but they do it so well and in such a unique way that I've been really impressed. So now I very much enjoyed it. Tatiana Maslany is outstanding as both, you know, Jennifer Walters and the She-Hulk, and kind of dealing with that duality has been really interesting. And I am always a sucker for breaking the fourth wall. So anytime that it feels like the characters are turning to me and talking to me, because I'm just hanging out anyway, just feels good to be involved. But so I'm caught up on that. I have been waiting to binge Andor because I watched the first episode and I stopped myself because I really wanted to watch, you know, like 3 or 4 in a row. And so now we've got 4 out there. So I will probably dive into that tomorrow. But I've heard good things there too. But other than that, like you said, it's been back to the old. When I noticed the gore thing, I watched an episode of Murder She Wrote, and then I watched an episode of Bones. And that was a very big difference. And you know, on Bones everything is done in sort of a scientific way, and it's, you know, it's gore, but it's also like Hollywood science, so it feels different. But it was like, wow, this is totally different in how you look at dead bodies between, you know, 1988 and 2008. You know, I can't remember when Bones came out, but it was, yeah, probably 2010ish, but a big difference in 20 years. So.
Oh yeah. I think that's all I got for you. I am getting to go to Memphis this week for work, to St. Jude Children's Hospital, and I am excited about that because I do think St. Jude is phenomenal and they do some amazing things. It's a cancer hospital and no child is ever charged, and the research that they do is amazing. So I'm very excited for that.
And that's like, they used to do the radiothon back in our, you know, radio days in Kentucky. So it's a big organization and really cool. Always was a highlight of the year when that would roll around.
Yeah, and we do the radiothon here, and that will probably be about March timeframe. So I this is the first time I've ever been to St. Jude, and I have been, you know, a supporter and a fan for many years. So to be able to go and to see the hospital, and everybody says that, you know, despite what is happening inside the hospital, it's a very uplifting place, and that's done intentionally for the children. So I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah, it'll be awesome.
All right. Well, like I said, we're gonna this week do things a little bit differently. So are you ready to jump into the B-side?
I am ready. Let's do this.
So of course we talked about how we both, well, you got through about 15 minutes. I did get through this series of Dahmer, and like I said, that I think the most intense part was how, don't get me wrong, it is graphic, and to know that this happened to real people is mortifying and it's heartbreaking. But I just think it's the intensity of the characters, because, you know, as somebody that watches true crime, ID channel, I mean, they're graphic. You know, there's been other Netflix specials, and Ted Bundy, for goodness sake, you know, it's just, and because they even talk about John Wayne Gacy a bit in this series, and you know, they've got the John Wayne Gacy tapes on Netflix, and I just think it's, they, like you said, the point of view of it, and it's almost like you're watching it firsthand. It's not it is not from his point of view or anything like that, but it's just like you're legitimately in the room, fly on the wall, watching these things happen, and it is intense. But I think we forget a lot of times when we do listen to true crime, watch true crime, talk about true crime, we do forget that these are real people. So this week, since it is all over the place, there's even a place that has gotten a hold of his reading glasses and Bible and some family photos, and they're like selling them. Ew. Ew.
But
Right.
somebody's gonna buy it. People be
I
weird.
know that's the thing. People do be weird. So I just wanted to, let's just look at his victims and not the crime and the way they were killed, but their life. I just wanted to do that a bit differently this week.
Yeah, and it often it's a function of, we deal with serial killers that end up interacting or killing like a dozen people, and so
Right.
just in the interest of time, we can't probably give them
can't,
all the
right.
level of detail that they deserve.
Yeah. So this week we are on the B-side talking about the victims, the beautiful people and whose lives were cut way too short of Jeffrey Dahmer. The first victim was 18-year-old Stephen Hicks. Stephen had just graduated from high school and he was on his way to a rock concert at Chippewa Lake, Ohio, which was about 25 miles away from where everything happened. His dad actually described him as a deeply caring person. And his dad, Richard, said that he recalled an anecdote, according to the Associated Press, about a hunting trip where Stephen had shot a rabbit and he was so proud that he actually bawled his eyes out. Again, he was on his way. He had hitched, and we talked about hitchhiking in the 70s and how it wasn't like a big deal. But
yeah, it was normal.
He was on his way to a rock concert. Next is Stephen Tuomi. Stephen grew up in, now, Adam, you might be able to help me because I don't want to say it wrong, but Ontonagon in Michigan.
Oh, that sounded good. I just like to say things fast when I don't know. So Ontonagon.
Ontonagon. And he was actually a short order cook at a restaurant in Milwaukee, and his classmates remembered him as quiet but extremely artistic. One classmate, according to USA Today, named Priscilla Marley Chenoweth, she says, I was in art class with him and made a beautiful lead-stained glass lamp that I can still remember. She said, it was just beautiful, and I remember he could do just about anything artistic. Then we have 14-year-old Jamie Doxtitter. He was nearly 6 feet tall. He was half Stockbridge and half Oneida, and he liked to play pool and ride his bike. His mom actually lived in Tampa, Florida, and he was the oldest of 4 children. And she says, his mom, Debbie Vega, says, one of my son's favorite sayings from the Bible was, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He had actually run away from home to escape an abusive stepfather. His mom says that he was misunderstood. She said he had a lot of love, and I loved him. We have 25-year-old Richard Guerrero. He hailed from a family of Mexican descent. He was not the type of person to just not come home. They said he was really responsible. He even babysat for his sister's 2-year-old daughter, his niece. We have 24-year-old Anthony Sears. He managed a Baker Square in Milwaukee, and he was actually planning to celebrate a recent promotion to manager with his family over Easter dinner. He was an aspiring model, and he was actually saving money to leave Milwaukee. His mother, her name is Marilyn, said that he loved having his photo taken, and he was, prone to like run off with friends for days at a time. So, that was just the kind of person he was. He just loved being with his friends, and he actually wanted to get married to his girlfriend as soon as he had enough money. So that was something that he was planning for his future. 33-year-old Ricky Beeks. So Ricky, he often went by an alias, Raymond Smith, and it wasn't unusual for him either to go, I feel like the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, it was just a different time. You know, if you just went away with your friends, it wasn't, it just wasn't seen as an emergency. People just were like, hey, I think I'm gonna, go to this music festival. I'll be back or whatever. I'm gonna
Yeah,
go
I
hang
mean,
out for the
you
weekends.
didn't have air tags on everything, so you didn't lose your watch, or you weren't able to track your kids' movements through their phone or call them at a moment's notice. It was just a different level of comfort.
Right, right. Ricky was living with his half sister. Ricky was trying to kind of reform himself and his life after he'd been released from prison, and he was trying to take care of his 10-year-old daughter. Eddie Smith was 28 years old, and Eddie Eddie's sister called him the Sheik because he often wore a turban, like wrap around his head. And Eddie was an aspiring model, and man, talk about a beautiful smile on him. Um, he was raised in a Christian home, and his family said he was loving and trusting and respectful. They said he inherited all the blessings that a family structure had to offer, and the greatest of those blessings was love. And that was actually something that his brother said about him. Ernest Miller was 24 years old, and Ernest was actually starting classes at a college in Chicago because he wanted to become a professional dancer. His aunt Vivian Miller said that he was a talented dancer and that he was singing and performing when he was younger, and that he even used to sing at church. He graduated from Milwaukee High School of Arts at West Division, and then he worked for a little bit before he was going off to work, start his classes. Mm-hmm. We've got David Thomas, who was 23 years old. David had 2-year-old Cortisha, and his ex-girlfriend, Chandra, said that he was just a fun-loving guy. He had a penchant for the hustle life. She said it wasn't unusual for him to kind of dash off with friends and, go have a good time. Curtis Straughter was 18 years old. Curtis had attended a high school in Milwaukee, and then he joined Gay Youth Milwaukee at the age of 15, and he had a job as a nursing assistant. He was planning to get his GED and then attend modeling school. He went by the names Demetra and Kurta. He lived with his grandmother, and she said that he loved to sing and to dance, and that, he was a very loving child. Errol Lindsay was the youngest of 6 children at the age of 19. He was a plastic figures maker. His 8th grade teacher, Dorothy Klein, said that Errol loved to paint and that she had actually saved a watercolor that he had made, and she shared that with her other students. Errol's sister said, when I think of my brother, I like to think of how much of a goofball he was, and I still appreciate the fact that I'm standing for him. She said, he knows I'm still here for him. Anthony Hughes, who the show does go into a little bit more detail on. There's a full episode on Anthony. Anthony was 31 years old and deaf and gay. His mom described him as outgoing and happy and jolly, and said he always had a skill for making friends. The show actually shows when he was a baby, an infant, he had pneumonia, and that's how his deafness was brought about. He could read lips, and he communicated through sign language and written notes. His mom, Shirley, taught a Bible class at a church in Milwaukee. And I think because it is one of the few stories that they go into depth on, you really feel, don't get me wrong, you feel for all of the victims, but
right, yeah,
you really connect with his mom. And he just seemed like such a, again, they're all beautiful, but again, because he is the only one of the few that they go into depth on, like, you really just, what a beautiful soul Anthony was. He wanted to be, he had dreams of becoming a model, and he had actually moved away from home, and he was, he would come back home and visit his family on weekends, and because he was very, very family oriented, and they were just a very close-knit family. Conorak Sinastaphone was 14 years old. He's another one that the series actually goes into a little bit more detail. He's actually one of the more prominent cases. He was a high school freshman. He was like 6 feet tall. He was extremely loving with his family. And I know I said I wasn't going to get into the murders, but this one kind of have to touch on, because the really horrific part about Conorak is that Dahmer was actually on probation for molesting Conorak's brother, Samsak. So that's 2 victims that were touched by Dahmer. Samsak survived. He was able to get away from Dahmer. Conorak, unfortunately, was not. Again, he was a freshman in high school, came from a very, very big Laotian loving family. His dad was a farmer in Laos, and they had 9 children. Conorak was 3 years old when his family came from Laos, and he regularly played soccer at Mitchell Park, and he was just a fun-loving kid. Matt Turner was 20 years old, and he's a native of Flint, Michigan, and he actually lived in Chicago and wanted to be a model. He was very outspoken in who he was as a person. He directed the teen living program in Chicago and was said to be extremely friendly and bright and articulate. He occasionally went by the name of Donald Montrell. There's a 23-year-old Jeremiah Weinberger. Jeremiah was from Puerto Rico, and he actually lived in Chicago, and he was a customer service representative for a video store. His roommate, Tim, said he loved art and was very meticulous. He said his desk was always straight and he knew where everything was, and he always dressed nice and worried about what he wore and how he looked. There's Oliver Lacey, who is 23 years old. Oliver is the youngest of 3 sons. He had a 2-year-old son named Emmanuel, and he was actually engaged to be married. Oliver was from Oak Park, Illinois, and he ran track at River Forest High School. His mother, Catherine, describes her son as very outspoken. Oliver kept close to him a cross he wore on his neck, a cross that belonged to his late father, and he moved to Milwaukee from Chicago. Joseph Bradenhoft was 25, and Joseph had actually just moved into an apartment in Milwaukee that was rented by his brother Donald. He just moved there from Illinois, and he had also at one point in time lived in Minnesota. Joseph had a wife and 3 children in Minnesota. Their ages 2 to 7. He loved sports and fishing. He had moved to Milwaukee for a job. And we have Tracy Edwards, who was actually able to escape from Jeffrey Dahmer. Tracy lived in Tupelo, Mississippi, where he had actually had some troubles himself. He had actually been in trouble for inappropriate relations with a 14-year-old girl. He goes to Wisconsin, and he has a few more run-ins with the law. He's arrested for things like drug possession, theft, property damage, failure to pay child support, bail jumping. But it doesn't matter. None of that makes it okay for what happened to him. He is the one that escaped, and he is the one that led to the downfall of Jeffrey Dahmer.
The one who basically made sure that he couldn't do it anymore.
Because he's actually the one that led police back to the apartment that Dahmer was in after he escaped. Again, I know I can't do these victims the justice that they deserve, but they do need to be talked about, because we do just forget that victims are people when we're talking about these stories. And like I said, because this is all over the place, I just felt like they deserve the attention.
Absolutely. Like I said, not even in the series, not all of them got as much screen time or focus as
We
they
don't even
deserve.
get the names of most of them until the very end.
Yeah.
You have the few names, like I said, Anthony Hughes and Konarak and Samsak, and then Tracy, because he is again the one that led to the downfall of Jeffrey Dahmer. But most of the other victims, you either know them as the hitchhiker or the jogger, or they don't discuss them at all. It's just in the lineage of what happened. So I hope that in talking about them, we give them some sense of justice.
It's always interesting when, especially something that, yeah, this was 30 years ago, but still, that's not that long a time. I mean, people are like, families are still alive. People, like, I remember, being a kid when this story came out, a 10-year-old kid, just one state over, and how I still have memories from, hearing about it the first time. And it's always interesting. You wonder, how does this give the families a chance to tell their story? Is it, drudging up, a very hard time? So I understand why we want to do these things, and it makes sense that like shows are going to be made about these people, but it always feels like there's a very double-edged sword to it.
Yeah. But that is the B-side this week.
And of course, you can go to our website and get all of the links, all of Brooke's sources on there if you want to read more about each of these individuals, and remember them in that way as well. So that'll all be up on our website.
Well, good luck with your A-side now, buddy.
Yeah, all right. So we're going to change an entirely different direction, which is why we do this. Honestly, this is why we do the A-side, B-side, because I could not, if we just did 111 episodes of, that level of intensity, I mean, I would have to probably watch way more cartoons than I do right now. Probably still gonna throw on some Phineas and Ferb, maybe some Tailspin or something later tonight. But as a palate cleanser, we will move on to the A side, and I have been doing the 3 fantasy series that you can go watch right now. First, we talked about Shadow and Bone with their first season out on Netflix, and second season coming up here supposedly soon. It's being filmed. We haven't told us when it's coming out. And the last week we talked about the first and second season of Fate the Winx saga, which I found out was actually based on a 2000s cartoon, and they completely changed. And there's an entire group of people online that are, I wouldn't say militantly mad, but certainly not pleased with the adaptation. So that dovetails very wonderfully into part 3 of our fantasy series that are on TV right now that you can watch, that I'm going to talk about. And it is another that has an incredibly intense and, I don't want to say powerful, but maybe powerful enough to influence whether or not, more of it gets made. But the best part is I could be describing one of 2 different shows that are running right now. It could either be House of Dragons, which is the prequel to Game of Thrones, or it could be the Rings of Power, which is the prequel to the Lord of the Rings series, both before The Hobbit as well. I am talking about Lord of the Rings, which is more my style. Game of Thrones completely burnt me out. I have no desire to watch any more stories in that universe. I think a lot of people, by the end of the series, we were kind of, just over it. So I did not enjoy the last probably 2 seasons, really, of Game of Thrones. So you will get no House of Dragons information from me, because I have written that one off. However, that means that we're actually going to talk about Lord of the Rings and deal with my own personal uncomfortability with the entire franchise. Okay. I have a very complicated, or weird memory of Game of Thrones, or I'm sorry, of Lord of the Rings. I did not read the Lord of the Rings when I was a kid in high school. I read The Hobbit in 6th grade. It was okay. I wasn't super into it. I was much more a C.S. Lewis, the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, Narnia. I read every single one of those books as a kid. And that was kind of where like that and Star Wars, Star Trek were my fantasy and sci-fi, escapism was. But it wasn't until the Lord of the Rings movies came out in the late or early 2000s. And I was in college at the time, and the person I was dating was a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and we were talking about the series. At that point, we were living separately because they had graduated already and moved to California, and I was in Minnesota. So I bought the book at Barnes and Noble with, one of those, it's always a bad sign, or it's a slightly embarrassing sign when you buy the book and it's got, the picture from the movie and it's like, now a major motion picture. And you're like, yeah, I'm the guy who's buying this because I'm going to go to the movie. I don't really know what it's about. I didn't realize that the Lord of the whole thing was going to be 3 movies at that point. So I read way too much and was very confused by the time we got to the movie. But my uncomfortability, and one of the reasons that I've sort of avoided Lord of the Rings for the last 10 years, is the day that Fellowship of the Ring is opening. A whole group of people are going from my school, big friend group, probably 20-30 people, are all carpooling down to the Mall of America, and I'm going to get there first because, and I didn't even really think about this at the time, but it fit so well. Right before I met everybody for the movie, I had to stop at the jeweler and pick up my engagement ring.
Oh.
So I pick up the engagement ring that I'm going to use to propose in a couple of weeks. And I'm sitting in the movie theater with this giant epic story about a ring, with a ring sitting in my pocket the entire time. Did not plan that, didn't even really think about the connection. But then for me, Lord of the Rings was always connected with that ring and that engagement. And then eventually, as my life went on and that marriage did not work out, it kind of colored my enjoyment of Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
I've still, got all the movies on DVD. I've seen all the Hobbit ones. In a fun little, callback, my oldest was in The Hobbit as a stage play, playing Gollum, and that got me into watching the Hobbit movies because I hadn't seen those. And so I was cautiously optimistic, but also not, waiting breathlessly for this new series. And the Rings of Power tells the story of what happened before. And we've seen Lord of the Rings, you've seen all of the flashbacks about when Sauron crafted the one ring and took over everybody in the giant war and everything. But it's all done in sort of flashbacks. This fills in all of the background story. And one of the most challenging things when you have something that is so incredibly beloved, and people like literally can get their master's degree in just focusing on Lord of the Rings, that you're going to have an incredibly powerfully grumpy fan base if you don't do exactly what they want. And the problem is there's so much detail that you're never going to make everybody happy. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we've run into with the Rings of Power. So with a fan base as passionate and mobilized as Tolkien has, it was always going to be a challenge to take the backstory, which has never really been fully fleshed out. It wasn't like there were more books that they could update. There were books and there were dictionaries and there were notes and maps, and J.R.R. Tolkien was an incredibly detailed individual. And so he crafted this entire, universe with languages and races and histories. And there was a lot of info, but there was never a very clear, this is the story that they're going to do. Mm-hmm. So when Amazon, and again, Amazon being, one of those things that people are it's very easy for them to rally against because, it's, this mega corporation that's taking over everything and they're going to spend so much money. Some people seem to want to watch Amazon fail or root for failure of Jeff Bezos and that sort of thing. I thought it was pretty cool that they looked at it and said, hey, we want to do this story, want to do it right. We're going to spend a ton of money. And I love the idea of doing a series to tell this major story. I think Lord of the Rings was so different when it came out. We had these 3-hour movies that with the extended edition could be 4 or 5 hours. It was such an epic story to tell. I wonder how that story could have been done if it had been a series instead. Maybe they wouldn't have had to cut out Tom Bombadil. Maybe they would have had more of the middle of the Fellowship of the Ring instead of rushing towards, what felt like they were rushing towards battle. It would be really interesting. So I was excited, kind of apprehensive. A lot of people were convinced it was going to be a complete disaster. And even up until it was released, the first day that it came out, I was not, sitting on my couch with a bucket of popcorn ready to go. I kind of wanted to see what people had to say about the first episode before I dove in. And the thing that drove me a little bit nuts is that there were so many people just ready to rip it apart that you could tell people were looking for reasons to say it sucked. Because to be fair, no one clicks on less people are going to click on a headline that says, hey, I really enjoyed the Rings of Power. Because that's not as fun as the Rings of Power is a disaster and here's why.
Right.
Tabloid magazines don't usually put like good news on it. It's not like, family has a very nice trip to the Dells and comes home and realizes they didn't spend as much money as they thought. That's not a good headline. Although that would be a great headline for Wisconsin Dells. So everything that came out about the series was very frustrating. The reviews I read are like, oh, the story has no point, no pacing. This is after one episode where they're basically just setting up the entire system. They're giving us, an idea of where the world's going to be and who the characters are. And so it can't be a fully complete story. It's an introduction. It's like listening to, the first 30 seconds of a song and then deciding you've heard the whole thing.
Right.
It was very frustrating. And that actually got me. It was like, okay, this is ridiculous. People are just out to bash this thing no matter what. I saw people 2 years ago saying that it was going to be horrible when it was announced. And I don't even know how you could decide, that this is going to be horrible when someone announces they're going to do a thing. You have to at least give them a little bit of a shot.
Right.
And you could tell they've spent a ton of money on it. It is beautiful. It looks movie quality. Like it feels like a natural progression from the Peter Jackson, series of movies. It feels like returning to that same world, but slightly different. And the biggest challenge is you're telling a story that happens thousands of years in the past from our main storyline, but there are some characters that are in this story that we've seen before. And so when you've got that prequel, there is sort of no one knew, we watched the first season of Game of Thrones, that Sean Bean was going to die in the last episode. I remember being just absolutely shocked because I hadn't read the book. Everybody else is like, oh, this is what's going to happen. But with this, we know that there are going to be characters that are going to be around for you've got some characters that are familiar, like Galadriel, who is played by Morfydd Clark in this new version, The Rings of Power. Of course, was played by Cate Blanchett in the series, but thousands of years in between. And one of the biggest issues that people have had with the character is there wasn't a lot that told us about Galadriel's backstory. And so we're crafting this out of, simple notes that Tolkien had wrote. I mean, at one point he described her as being of an Amazon disposition. 2 words. And 2 words, and that's what the showrunners and the scriptwriters and the creative people behind this series had to kind of craft out of. And for me, the portrayal of her character and how clearly she's going to go through an entire metamorphosis to become the character that we see thousands of years later in The Lord of the Rings. But understandably, it's not going to be the same person. And the fact that reviewers and fans and YouTube people are all like, oh, wow, this isn't how she acts in the Lord of the Rings book. She would never do that. It was like, but okay, one, I'm a very different person than I was 20 years ago when Lord of the Rings came out.
Right.
Let alone thousands of years ago of growth that I'm going to have in between there. So it makes a lot of sense to me that there are stuff that we're learning about here that crafts the person the character that we see in the later movies. And how does this person become that person? No one is static. And that's kind of blows me away that all the, many critics are saying, well, that's not how she acted in this, so she wouldn't act that way now, in this earlier period. When people change, we grow, especially over thousands of years, you're going to be a very different person. I cannot imagine living 1,000 years. I don't want to live 100 years. But I'm sure that if I live 100 years, the Adam that is doing a podcast in 60 years is going to be a very different Adam than the one who is doing it right now. That's just how people are. And people change, and we need to get used to it. And characters should grow, and that's interesting to me. Seeing Elrond, who was, the king of the elves in the Lord of the Rings series, now is just a normal sort of middle management elf in this one, is fascinating to me to see how the character grows. Those are really the only two characters that we know continue on to the main story. And of course, somewhere in all of this is the story of Sauron, the all-seeing eye at the tower, in Mount Doom, the guy who crafted the ring. They've done a very clever storytelling tactic, I will say, not trope, but more of a tactic or strategy, in that we are 6 episodes in as of this recording. The 7th episode will come out the day this goes live, so don't know anything about the 7th one yet. But through 6 episodes, we haven't seen, we don't know who Sauron is. We don't know if he's going to show up. He is basically rumor and idea and all these things that are happening. And while that big bad is hanging out there somewhere, there are some really fun interactions in the story and the weaving that comes before all of that. Whether it's Elrond and his friend Durin, who is a dwarf, and they find Mithril, that relationship, the friendship of how they've been friends for a long time, since the War of Wrath, but he didn't stop by for 20 years. But for an elf, 20 years is like maybe 6 months. To a dwarf, that's a long time. And there's a really fun little friendship moment where you're like, hey, we were besties, and then all of a sudden you just didn't stop by for 20 years, and the elf is like, oh yeah, that's like 5 minutes, sorry, I should have been back. That cultural understanding that didn't seem to fit just right. You've got the story of how the orcs land of Mordor was created, the background there, and where it came from, and the people that used to live in what was Mordor. Mordor wasn't always Mordor. I didn't know that. I had no idea. The books, it was just Mordor. It was scary. Don't go there. In this series, you get to see people that used to live there, how it was created, all of that backstory. And even though we don't yet have the big bad in Sauron, and the internet is awash with rumors and assumptions and theories about who Sauron is, when he's going to show up, and if we met him already, there is a very good bad guy already, who honestly is probably the most compelling character in the series so far. And one of the really interesting things that I think the series has done a good job of is, in The Hobbit and in Lord of the Rings, in the movies, orcs are bad. They are it's a binary, good, bad. They're evil. They're never redeemable. Whereas this series, and the character of Adar, which is played by Joseph Malway, who does an amazing job and honestly is given probably the most to work with. There's been a lot of reviewers who complain about basically, Galadriel's character is just like a strong-headed, Amazon warrior, and that's, very one note. Whereas Adar has so much more going on. He's a fallen elf who was tortured, but maybe not tortured, but he creates the orcs. They call him father, and he humanizes the orcs in that they are just a people that have the right to survive like anywhere else, in a place to live. And that idea comes from another small, note that Tolkien had, where later in his life he was concerned. He struggled as an author and a creator of this world to have the thought that orcs were just irredeemable. that they were just pure evil, that they couldn't decide to be good. And that is a really cool moment and a question that's being asked that was never asked before in the Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit. Could orcs be good? And or it's a very nature or nurture situation. They've been hunted their entire lives. They've been considered complete outcasts. And in episode 6, which is easily the best episode so far of the entire series, everything that all the groundwork that they laid in episodes 1 through 5 comes to a sort of giant crescendo in episode 6. And in that, there's a great scene which the series can plod, and it feels like they've been doing a lot of setup, but you have to when you're building an entire world. There's a scene that is simply between Adar and Galadriel after the orcs have been defeated, and Galadriel rides in on the horse, and there's finally a big battle scene, and everybody is excited about that. But it's just the two of them. Adar is changed against a post in a barn, and Galadriel is interrogating him. And throughout that entire scene, you get the feeling that, and there's even a great line by Adar, that this is not a world that is as black and white, as binary 1 and 0 as we think. Mm-hmm. Adar even looks at Galadriel at one point, and spoiler alerts, I'm not going to say. There's a great line that he utters in that scene because I want people to watch it. It is probably my favorite scene of the series so far. It is powerful. It makes you question each of the characters, wondering, who am I really supposed to be rooting for here? And I've even heard, read some reviewers who have said, that they don't like that the characters are so poorly written that they're rooting for the orcs to win. Okay, that's just inflammatory to get a lot of clickbait. I think it's got a lot of possibility, and it is improved with each episode. And there's so many strains that we haven't even talked about. The fact that, I mentioned you've got Elrond and Galadriel, which go all the way to the main story. But just before, the Lord of the Rings story, in the flashbacks, they talk about Isildur, who is the one who cuts, the ring off of Sauron's hand. The character of Isildur we get some backstory about him in this area. He's at this point just a lowly stable boy in the army. There's the entire Nuramor island that has its own culture and background. You've also got the Harfoots, which are sort of this age's version of hobbits, but they're nomadic. Whereas the hobbits always just wanted to stay at home, the Harfoots travel around in little, sort of almost like a gypsies caravan type of thing. And you've got their story. And then this guy that seemingly fell from the sky, who we're not sure who he is. There are so many seeds that have been planted in these first 6 episodes that I think for a lot of people, because of the scale of the story, it can be overwhelming, and it can feel like, okay, they're just giving us too much here. But when you're dealing with a world this big and this many, lines of, overlap, it's going to take a little bit to get there. I think the idea of weaving together, like threads in a loom. At the beginning, it feels like you've just got a lot of thread and you don't really know where you're going. But the longer you go, as they're weaving it together and you start to see the fuller picture, everything starts to make sense. And I think we're starting to see that in episode 6. I'm very excited to see what happens in 7 and 8. And they've already announced that it's coming back for next season because they're getting a lot of, no press is bad press, even though there are people that are convinced it's horrible. And there are people who are making their income by getting clickbait hits on this is trash and here's why, YouTube videos and articles. One site that I really have enjoyed is nerdist.com. The link to all of their in-depth articles. They've got YouTube videos, which are usually a couple minutes that talk about the episode, but then they go into so much more depth on their website as well. So that'll be available on our website. And of course, if you want to check it out, it is one of the strangest Rotten Tomatoes scores that we've seen. usually I tend to like movies that no one likes or TV shows that no one likes, or you've got those strange ones where the fans love the movie but critics hate it.
Mhm.
This one is flipped on its head, because even though it seems like everything that I've read has been negative, somehow it has a tomato meter of 84% overall. However, the audience score is all the way down at 38.
Oh wow.
So it's a huge, that I think that just speaks to how divided people are about it is beautiful, it's well shot, it looks great. Yes, the dialogue can be overly flowery sometimes and then silly the next. But my favorite is, I'll read one review that complains about how the dialogue doesn't match the poetry that is in Tolkien's original works. And then the next one, it will be a reviewer complaining about how the dialogue is too poetic and it feels forced. So it is one of those things where it feels like if you want to enjoy it, you absolutely will. If you want to find reasons to hate it, you will absolutely be able to hate that as well. One perfect example of that is in episode 6. There is a battle scene where some people are coming on a boat and then they're riding on horses. And in this world where we have orcs and wizards and, Balrogs, giant flame monsters, the reviewer was absolutely ticked off because they were like, well, it would take them way too long to get there. Even though at no point we're just assuming it's happening at the same time. I mean, we've got these people on Numenor. They could have been doing that, could have been like 3 weeks before the people that were, just because we go from scene to scene doesn't mean it's happening at the same exact time.
Right.
But the fact that has been an issue where people are like, wow, just logistically. I'm like, yes, logistically, the wizard couldn't get them there in time. Okay. It's this, when people
In
talk
this
about Lord of the Rings,
fantasy
like,
world.
yeah, they're like, well, why didn't he just fly the eagles into Mordor and drop the ring into them? Yeah, okay, buddy, just enjoy the movie. Also, the pushback that this is a more diverse cast than even the Lord of the Rings movies of 20 years ago, or the Hobbit movies of 10 years ago, and people are freaking out that, oh my gosh, a black elf, we've never seen that before. It was like, okay, but you're cool with the fact that there's an elf. Like, so you're accepting that there are wizards and elves, but they can't have diversity. Okay, right, that's our issue there. All right, so fly, dragons, cool, but making the characters be more reflective of the audience is totally, can't suspend your disbelief for that. I've enjoyed the series. I am not a Tolkien, expert or super fan. I enjoy the movies. I enjoy this series. I think if you are somebody who likes fantasy and can suspend your disbelief about logistics of troop movements and whether or not you could have diversity within casts of mythical creatures, then you will probably enjoy it. I think it is something that it does start out slow. It feels like it takes time, but that time is worth it. They're building towards something that so far feels like the climax. This episode 6, we still got 2 more coming, but this episode really felt like things came together, and they didn't even touch on a couple of the story threads at all in this episode. So we've got a whole lot to catch up on in episodes 7 and 8 as well. If you like the Lord of the Rings movies, I definitely think you should check this out. There is one thing that I will caution. We kind of mentioned this earlier, this being a cable series and coming on the heels of the success of Game of Thrones, it's gorier than you expect.
No,
at least in some of the episodes. Now it's not on level of nudity and violence of Game of Thrones. It's certainly not there, but there are, especially in this most recent, which has a big battle scene and some very tense moments, some very graphic moments that there's blood, it's stuff gushing. It's definitely not the same exact feeling that way. So be ready for that the violence and the graphic nature of it has been dialed up just a little bit now in the post Game of Thrones fantasy era. So check it out. It's on Amazon Prime. You probably can't escape it if you are on Amazon or you open up the Amazon Prime app, but give it a chance and don't be scared off by the negative reviews and the naysayers and the people that have been making money off of saying this is going to suck for years. And now it's like they can't walk it back. You know, if you've been saying something's going to be awful for 2 years, you'll look real silly if you're like, oh no, it's actually kind of good. So check out The Rings of Power on Amazon Prime. And that is part 3 of our You Can Watch It Right Now fantasy series on TV. And next week, I'll probably go back to a VHS movie that no one else can watch. And I just really want to talk
about. Like Adam said, all the links will be on our website, asidebsidepodcast.square.site. Adam, I am stepping on your toes.
No, I liked it. I was like, oh, wow. I don't have to worry about stuff right now. Now then you threw it back to me and I'm like, ah! It's like when you're not ready for the pass and it hits you in the face. Yes, and go to our website, asidebsidepodcast.square.site. We've got some new merch on the way. We talked about some BDs because it is going to get cold here before too long. You can subscribe to us on every single service. You can like, share. Anytime you click on something, that is good for us. Whether that even means you click on the first, you click on the episode and you just start listening for a little bit. I will say that our average listenership is high, like gets through about half of the episode. 50% of the people who listen, or say 60% of the people who listen to our episode get through at least half of the episode every time. So I don't know if that's like the Sex Panther, half the time it works 100% of the time, but it feels good. So definitely give us a shot there, share, like, and again, if you have feedback, and I'll open myself up to this, if you watched The Rings of Power, and as I've been talking about it this whole time, like flames are coming out the side of your head because you are so frustrated with it, send it to me. Tell me why. I would love to hear why you feel it's not as good as it should be, or how they've deviated from the book. I welcome that. And of course, on our website, you've got links to all of our sources, the individuals that Brooke talked about in the Jeffrey Dahmer story, giving face to the victims. Their story, links will be on there as well. And you can buy Brooke a coffee at buyusacoffee.com because she has to do a lot of work. Editing is no joke. It is not fast. It is tedious, and especially tedious when Adam's had too much caffeine and he keeps interrupting. So the fact that you don't hear me interrupting every 30 seconds, that's all Brooke.
Before we do get out of here, if you know someone in the California area, please, I can't believe that we're saying this, but for men between the ages of 35 and 55, if you know someone in the California area, you might want to tell them to be careful. We've talked about this statistic before, that the FBI says that there are dozens of unknown serial killers active at any time right now, but one has been identified in California. 6 victims have been taken by this unidentified person. So please, if you know someone in that area, this is an active, ongoing investigation in Stockton, California. These murders have been going on since April. So don't go, oh my gosh, Dahmer got somebody started. They've been going on since April of last year. There are some photos. ABC7 has some silhouette photos. Nothing clear has been released yet, but there's 6 victims. There's 5 men and 1 woman, and they're all between the ages of 21 and 55 right now. Yeah. So just putting that out there. If you know someone in that area, please tell them to be on high alert.
Bad vibes save lives. Feels weird, get out of there.
Yeah. Leave immediately.
Don't just stay to watch a little bit of the show. Go right away.
But there you go. That has been episode 111 of A Side B Side Podcast. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Brooke.